Hey there, welcome back to Story Slices, where we slice through the best Reddit tales just for you. Let's dive right into the first story. The first one is the Tittle story, and it starts like this. For context, I'm a self-made business owner who started with nothing. After years of grinding and building my company from the ground up, I finally reached a point where I could afford my dream property. About 18 months ago, I purchased a beautiful 5-acre estate on the outskirts of an upscale neighborhood. The property sits adjacent to a fancy community with an active HOA, but crucially, my land is not part of their jurisdiction. I specifically chose this property because it offered the perfect balance, close enough to civilization for convenience, but with enough space and freedom to create exactly what I wanted without someone telling me what color my mailbox had to be. Trust me, after growing up with nothing and building something for myself, the last thing I wanted was some committee dictating what I could do with my hard-earned property. The previous owner had let the place fall into disrepair, which is partly why I got such a good deal. The main house was solid but needed updating, and the grounds required significant work. Over the next year, I invested heavily in renovations. I added features that expressed my personal taste but would have given the neighboring HOA a collective aneurysm. I built a workshop that looked more like a rustic barn. I installed a water feature with colorful lighting. I even put up a 10-foot privacy fence along the boundary shared with the HOA neighborhood, painted a bold blue-gray that complemented my house but definitely wasn't on their approved color palette. The friction started small. While overseeing landscapers one day, a woman walked her dog past my property line and made a comment just loud enough for me to hear. It's a shame some people have no regard for neighborhood standards. Another time, a man in golf attire stopped his luxury SUV at the edge of my driveway and asked if I was planning to adhere to community guidelines for my ongoing renovations. When I politely explained that my property wasn't part of their HOA, he gave me a dismissive wave and said, "We all have a responsibility to maintain certain standards, whether it's official or not." I mostly laughed these interactions off. After all, I wasn't breaking any actual rules or laws. My property was mine to do with as I pleased, within county code compliance, which I was careful to maintain. Fast forward to this past spring. With my property renovations nearly complete, I decided to host a charity fundraiser for an education foundation that provides scholarships to underprivileged kids pursuing careers in technology. This cause is deeply personal to me. I grew up without means to attend college, and it was only through a similar scholarship program that I got my start. Now that I've achieved success, giving back is important to me. The event would host about 150 guests, including local business leaders, a few minor celebrities, and potential donors. I hired a professional event planning company, secured all the necessary permits from the county, and even coordinated with local law enforcement about the increased traffic flow for the evening. Everything was properly arranged, legal, and professional. 2 weeks before the event, I found an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a letter on fancy letterhead from the neighboring community's HOA. I still remember how my blood pressure rose as I read it. "It has come to our attention that you are planning an unauthorized commercial event on your property on June 15th. This constitutes a violation of our community bylaws regarding commercial activities and excessive gatherings. All events must be approved by the Architectural Control Committee at least 30 days in advance. As you have not submitted the proper paperwork, you must cancel this event immediately or face fines beginning at $500 per day and possible legal action." The letter was signed by someone identified as the HOA president. At first, I thought it was a joke. Then I realized they genuinely believed they had authority over my property. I decided the most reasonable approach was to call and clarify the misunderstanding. That was my first mistake. I found the HOA president's contact information on their community website and called. The conversation did not go well. "I received your letter about my upcoming charity event," I began, keeping my tone friendly and professional. "I wanted to clarify that my property isn't actually part of your HOA." "Yes, we're aware of your technical property status," the president responded with audible condescension. "However, your actions directly impact our community values and home prices. Our bylaws allow us to address issues that affect our neighborhood, regardless of formal membership status." I tried to explain again. "I understand your concern, but legally speaking, your HOA has no jurisdiction over my property. I've secured all the proper permits from the county." "Listen," the president's tone grew sharper. "We've had multiple complaints already about your unconventional property choices. This event will bring unwanted traffic and noise to our quiet community. As neighbors, we expect you to respect our standards." "I appreciate good neighborly relations," I replied, "but I'm proceeding with my event as planned. All legal requirements have been met." "Then you leave us no choice but to escalate this matter," they concluded before abruptly ending the call. After that conversation, I contacted a lawyer friend for advice. They confirmed what I already knew. The HOA had absolutely zero legal authority over my property. My friend suggested sending a formal response to create a paper trail in case things escalated further. I sent a certified letter explaining that while I respected their community standards within their boundaries, my property was not subject to their governance. I included copies of county permits for the event and expressed hope that we could maintain neighborly relations despite this disagreement. Their response was to double down. Over the next week, I received 2 more letters, each more threatening than the last. The final one suggested they would contact county officials about zoning violations and implied they had connections that could make things difficult for me. Then came the unannounced visits. First, it was just the HOA president who happened to be walking by and wanted to discuss my ongoing violations. I politely but firmly asked them to leave my property and to please schedule any future discussions through proper channels. 2 days later, while meeting with my event planner on my back patio, 3 people marched up my driveway. I recognized the HOA president, accompanied by 2 other board members. The president was carrying a folder of papers and looking determined. "We need to see your event permits," the president demanded without so much as a greeting. My event planner looked confused. I calmly stated, "This is private property. You weren't invited here." "We have every right to ensure compliance with neighborhood standards," one of the other board members said. "If you can't produce the proper approvals, we'll be forced to call the authorities." At this point, I took out my phone and began recording. "I'm documenting this interaction for legal purposes," I informed them. "Again, this is private property. You are not invited here. Please leave immediately." "You can't just do whatever you want," the president snapped. "This affects all of us." "I'm going to ask one more time for you to leave my property," I said firmly. "After that, I'll call the sheriff and report you for trespassing." They stood their ground for another minute, making vague threats about consequences, before finally turning to leave. As they walked away, the president called back, "This isn't over." My event planner was shocked. "Does this happen often?" she asked. "Unfortunately, it's becoming a pattern," I replied. I immediately sent the video recording to my lawyer, who advised me to install security cameras around the property perimeter. That turned out to be excellent advice. The day of the fundraiser arrived. Everything looked perfect. The catering team had set up elegant food stations around the property. A small stage had been erected for the brief program, where scholarship recipients would share their stories. Valet parking was arranged at the front of my long driveway. My event planning team had thought of everything, including subtle security stationed at key points around the property. The first guests began arriving at 6 p.m. Within half an hour, the event was in full swing. Several local business leaders had arrived, along with the mayor and 2 council members who supported educational initiatives. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, and early donation indicators were promising. At around 7 p.m., just as we were preparing for the formal program to begin, I noticed a commotion at the front entrance. The HOA president had returned, this time with 4 other board members and someone wearing what looked like an official uniform. I excused myself from a conversation and headed to the front, instructing security to stay alert but not intervene unless necessary. As I approached, I could hear the HOA president speaking loudly to my event coordinator. "This gathering violates multiple ordinances. This officer is here to shut it down immediately." The person in uniform turned out to be a county code enforcement officer who looked uncomfortable with the situation. I introduced myself calmly. "I understand there might be some concern about my event," I said to the officer. "May I ask what specific violation is being alleged?" The officer explained that he'd received reports of an unauthorized commercial event violating zoning regulations. I retrieved my folder of permits and documentation, which I'd wisely kept readily accessible. "Here are all my permits, including the temporary event permit from the county, noise variance approval, and confirmation of our coordination with the Sheriff's Department for traffic management," I explained. "As you can see, everything is in order." The officer reviewed the documents carefully while the HOA contingent grew visibly agitated. After confirming that everything was indeed legitimate, he apologized for the interruption. "These all appear to be in order," he told me, then turned to the HOA group. "There don't seem to be any violations here." "That's impossible," the HOA president sputtered. "This type of event clearly violates residential zoning ordinances." "Actually," the officer explained patiently, "this property is zoned as rural residential, which allows for occasional events with proper permitting, which they have." The HOA members huddled together, whispering furiously. I thought they would leave after being so thoroughly refuted, but instead, they attempted to push past and enter my event anyway. "We have a right to inspect for other violations," one of them declared. "No, you don't," I said firmly. "This is a private event on private property. You are not invited guests. Please leave now." Security stepped forward at this point, making it clear that the HOA members would not be entering. Most of them reluctantly turned to leave, but I noticed one board member, a particularly vocal critic of my property renovations, slip away toward the catering area instead of heading for the exit. I discreetly asked one of my security team to keep an eye on him via our newly installed cameras. Sure enough, the camera caught this person attempting to unplug the refrigeration units for the catering station. When that didn't work because the cords were secured, he actually tried to tip over a table of appetizers before a security staff member intervened. By this time, the confrontation at the entrance had drawn attention from some of my guests, including the mayor and several prominent business leaders. I hadn't intended to make the HOA issue public, but now that it was unfolding in front of everyone, I decided to address it head-on. I asked the event coordinator to move up my welcome speech. When I took the stage a few minutes later, I faced a crowd that was curious about the disruption they'd witnessed. "Thank you all for coming tonight to support educational opportunities for deserving students," I began. "Some of you may have noticed a small disturbance earlier. Unfortunately, that's part of a pattern of harassment I've experienced from the neighboring HOA who mistakenly believe they have authority over this property." I briefly explained the situation, emphasizing that I had followed all legal requirements for the event. Then I pivoted to the purpose of our gathering. While some focus on building walls and enforcing rules, I believe in building bridges and creating opportunities. That's why I'm pleased to announce that in addition to tonight's fundraising goal for scholarships, I'm personally donating an additional sum to establish a community enhancement fund. This fund will support beautification projects, infrastructure improvements, and public amenities that will benefit not just my property, but all surrounding areas, including our neighbors in the HOA community. The announcement received enthusiastic applause. Several guests who lived in the HOA neighborhood approached me afterward, expressing embarrassment over the board's behavior and appreciation for my community-minded approach. The rest of the event went beautifully, raising significant funds for the scholarship program. The attempted disruption by the HOA had actually created more sympathy and support for our cause. Several guests made donations specifically because they were impressed by how I handled the situation with grace. The next morning, my lawyer sent a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA board. The letter detailed all instances of harassment, trespassing, and the attempted vandalism, which was clearly captured on our security footage. We demanded a formal apology, financial compensation for security costs we'd incurred as a result of their actions, and assurances that there would be no further interference with my property. To strengthen our position, we also filed complaints with the County Property Association Oversight Committee, the State Real Estate Commission, and the local district attorney's office regarding the HOA board's abuse of power and misrepresentation of authority. The story might have ended there, but the local newspaper caught wind of the confrontation at my event. A reporter who had attended as a guest wrote a feature about the charity fundraiser and included details about the HOA attempted disruption. The article portrayed the event positively, highlighting the scholarships funded and my additional community enhancement donation. In contrast, it described the HOA board's actions as overreaching and contrary to the spirit of community the event embodied. The public exposure created a significant backlash within the HOA community itself. Residents who hadn't been aware of their board's actions were appalled. Many felt the board had embarrassed their community and potentially exposed them to legal liability. An emergency HOA meeting was called, where numerous residents demanded accountability. Within 2 weeks, 3 board members, including the president, were forced to resign. The remaining board members reached out through their attorney to negotiate a settlement. They agreed to issue a formal apology, pay damages to cover my additional security costs, and make a matching contribution to my community enhancement fund. Perhaps most satisfyingly, the new board president sent a personal note acknowledging that my property renovations and charitable activities had actually increased interest in the neighborhood and potentially raised property values, rather than lowering them as had been claimed. Over the following months, tension gave way to cautious cooperation. I maintained my property independence but worked with the new HOA leadership on some joint beautification projects at our shared boundary. The Community Enhancement Fund financed improved sidewalks, better street lighting, and environmental conservation efforts that benefited everyone. 1 year later, I hosted another fundraiser. This time, several HOA residents attended as invited guests, including 2 former board members who had opposed me so vigorously. One of them actually approached me during the event with a sheepish expression. "I owe you an apology," they said quietly. "We were wrong about you and your property. The improvements you've made have actually helped our home values, and this charity work has brought positive attention to the whole area. I was too busy enforcing rules to see the bigger picture." I accepted their apology graciously. "Sometimes good neighbors don't need the same rules to create something valuable together," I replied. The real victory wasn't in proving the HOA wrong or even in the legal settlement. It was in transforming an adversarial relationship into a collaborative one that benefited the entire community. By standing my ground firmly but responding to aggression with community-mindedness rather than escalating hostility, I not only protected my rights but actually improved the neighborhood dynamic. For anyone facing similar situations with overreaching HOAs or neighborhood busybodies, my advice is simple: know your legal rights, document everything, respond professionally rather than emotionally, and look for opportunities to build community even with difficult neighbors. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting back at others, but about creating something positive that makes their negativity look small by comparison. I taught them a lesson, but more importantly, we all came out ahead in the end. And that's a far more satisfying conclusion than simply winning a neighborhood power struggle. The next one is entitled People Story. So, some background. My brother, we'll call him John, and I are very different people and always have been. I'm a nerdy guy who likes playing Dungeons and Dragons and works from home coding websites. He's always been sporty and has one of those corporate office jobs where I swear half of his work is just playing golf and going to fancy lunches. We didn't always get along, but we're pretty good these days. He started dating his girlfriend, who we'll call Jane, a few years back during what was a pretty low point for me in life. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship that had ended anything but amicably, was burning out of the career I went to college for, and in general was about 2 paychecks away from having to move in with my folks. The stress of it all was taking a toll on my body. I went from the lightly chubby I'd been my whole life to just straight up fat, and shortly after the breakup I had an anxiety attack so bad it put me in the hospital. It was not a good time to get to know me. I was basically the picture of a duck-up older brother. But I turned it around. I got the mental health assistance I needed to diagnose and treat some long-standing issues. With that as a springboard, I started exercising more and eating better, finding cooking to be a good hobby that also led to me eating less takeout and processed foods. I'm still no Adonis, still got a bit of a tummy, but I'm much stronger and feel better. I was able to quit my job and find a new one in a field that I never considered but that I found I loved enough that I'm going back to school to work on a PhD in the fall so I can pursue it to a greater extent. And finally, I started dating again. Someone, we'll call her Flo, who was a better match for me than my ex. Which all brings us to the night things went wrong. We have a family gathering at my parents' house, extended family and all plus Jane and Flo. I'm making dinner, a beef Wellington. Everyone is raving about my food. I also did dinner this past Thanksgiving as well, and also my recent glow-up, my new job, the program I got into, etc. I'm smiling politely and mostly just trying to do a bunch of dinner prep while they won't get out of my way. Then Jane says, "Yeah, never thought I'd picked the wrong brother, but I'm starting to think I might have." You could hear a pin drop. I said nothing. Again. Just awkwardly laughed at what I assumed to have been a bad joke. Jane's face immediately changed to the look of someone who has only just realized they're duck up. John looked pissed, and the two of them left the kitchen shortly after. From what I could see, she seemed to be trying to apologize to him while he looked really hurt. My relatives said nothing. Not immediately anyway. Flo kind of just winced, and later told me that it was really awkward having to stand there, but she didn't know what else to do that wouldn't have escalated things or put me on the spot. That was over 2 months ago, and both John and Jane avoid me like the plague. Not even a text since then. Whenever I meet up with my relatives they badmouth her over it, and while I think Jane did duck up saying that, I really do think she was just making a bad joke. Personally, I think they're overreacting. This aside, I think she's probably the first person he's ever dated who was a fit for him in terms of personality and lifestyle. The only person being normal about it is Flo, who thinks it was weird but like me just a dumb thing to say. No jealousy, she knows Jane ain't my type. How do I clear the air with Jane and John and get people to stop bringing this up? I'm sick of hearing about it and just want things to go back to how they were before. Right now it just feels like a dark cloud over all of our interactions. Update, same post. Same day UPD8, message John. Grabbing a beer over the weekend. We'll update later. In the meantime, some clarifying info for some of the other comments. Jane is a very nice person and she really cares for John. She's been with him through some difficult times, including a period where work separated the two of them for 3 months, and they're otherwise attached at the hip. She does have what some call a lack of filter. We've known that for a while. But she'd absolutely never leave him for me. For why my relatives won't let it go? Probably because they're a bunch of old Italian Catholics who like to gossip. Which, incidentally, is probably why they didn't like the joke in the first place. My brother and I have a pretty good relationship as adults and aren't especially competitive. My folks and relatives don't favor one of us over the other, though admittedly they do understand my brother's career path better than mine. I agree with a number of comments that the impetus of the joke was that I'm a good cook, especially when it comes to be celebratory feasts. John is okay in the kitchen, but he's the kind of guy for whom a fancy meal just means picking up a more expensive cut of steak. I really don't think it has anything to do with me being the hot brother now, as a few comments suggested. John and I have always looked very different, Comparing us would be more a matter of personal preference than any kind of objective hotness scale. He's tall with a runner's build and I'm a few inches shorter with a wide build and more visible muscles as weightlifting is my main form of exercise. Lastly, not to toot my own horn, but I've never had any issues getting dates barring the aforementioned year-long period where my life was falling apart, so I must have been doing something right. Lastly, as some have said, I probably could have saved everyone some awkwardness by playing along with Jane's comment with a "sorry, Flo got to me first" or something else similar. I go into what Flo dramatically calls the kitchen death drive while cooking complicated meals, where I'm laser focused on the task at hand to the exclusion of all else, and my responses to questions tend to be short, curt, and even a bit rude. Normally I would have tried to help salvage the bad joke, but I was searing a big expensive piece of tenderloin at the moment, so my thoughts were elsewhere. Update: met up with John at a sports bar we go to sometimes when our dad is in town. Shot the crap for a little bit before I asked him if everything was cool. He didn't really know what I was talking about at first. I had to remind him that weird thing at the family dinner, and he immediately knew what I was talking about. I asked if we were all right, if they were all right, and lastly what we should do about our nosy Catholic relatives gossiping about all this crap. First off, he confirmed what I, and most of y'all, thought was true. Jane was talking about my cooking exclusively. She's a big fan. It's actually the reason she came to that gathering in the first place. So that's good to hear. Nothing to do with my physique, though John did congratulate me on the additional weight I'd lost since the whole ordeal. Second, John's issue with Jane's joke had nothing to do with the idea of her leaving him for me or that he'd lost some prestige as the athlete in our family or anything like that. Something I didn't mention in the original post because I didn't think it was important is that John and I grew up middle class while Jane's family is loaded. Not billionaires, but she graduated from an Ivy League college with no student loans, which she's turned into a well-paying and highly specialized tech job. She and John go on lots of vacations together, have a very nice apartment in a very expensive part of the city, all that stuff. The thing is, while John does pretty well for himself at work, he's not making nearly as much as she is and doesn't have old family money to fall back on. Trying to keep up with her has been putting a significant dent in his savings. Apparently, he's been psyching himself up to talk to her about how they may need to make some lifestyle adjustments so he can put more money away in savings, and was worried how that might go. Hearing her say that I might be a better option after hearing about my new, to his mind, high-earning PhD program was the sort of thing that came at exactly the wrong time, so he had to walk away. I did have a little laugh at that. This PhD will open a lot of doors for me, but it's definitely not going to make me millionaire, adding to the sting of that. While he and I don't have much of a rivalry, he does still have some insecurity about me being the smart one of the two of us. I say this with all the love in my heart. John is an extremely intelligent guy, but you'd never know that from just talking to him. He's a whiz with numbers and knows more about corporate finance than nearly anyone I've ever met at any age. He also speaks with the vocabulary and goofy demeanor of a frat boy. So on top of the anxiety about his rich girlfriend thinking he's too broke to hang out, he was a little frustrated about the idea of a doctorate putting more perceived distance between us. He apologized for that jealousy. I told him it was fine, and if folks were giving him crap he could tell them he wasn't going to look over their stock portfolios anymore. He also said that he and Jane spoke about the money and she took it very well. The reason he hadn't been in touch lately was because they'd been looking for a more affordable apartment to move to when their lease is up. The only thing that left was how to handle the extended family. Apparently John didn't know they were still on about that, largely because whenever he and Jane see them they just talk about how Flo has too many piercings and swears too much. That gossip was news to me, so we mutually said, duck 'em, and decided to continue not really letting what they say about our partners get to us. Instead, we agreed to spend more time just the four of us. And, before we left for the night, John did ask me for a few of my recipes. The next one is entitled People Story. I am the stepmother of a boy who just turned 6. His mother died when he was an infant, so there is no bio mother in the picture. He spends time with his maternal grandmother about once a month, usually for a weekend at a time. This has been going on for a year now. Prior to that she lived farther away and it was not as often for the visits. His grandmother is a little off, in the best of circumstances. Now, I want to preface this by saying I am not accusing her of anything. I am just wondering if this sounds unusual to anyone else. Lately, say the last 5x he saw her, he comes back home with his pajamas unworn. She doesn't send any of his clothes home washed, so I can tell easily what he wore and didn't. I asked him, "Hey, what do you wear to sleep at Grandma's?" And he got really worried looking, like he was going to be in trouble if he told me, but eventually caved and told me he sleeps in his underwear only. I asked him where he sleeps at his grandma's. I always just assumed she made up the couch for him, and he said in her bed with her. I asked him what his grandma wears to bed and he said her underpants. Now, am I often thinking it is inappropriate for a 6-year-old boy to sleep in only his underpants in the same bed as his grandmother, who is only in her underpants? This is not anything I ever saw or did as a child. We never slept in just underwear. Not even in the summer. And never in bed with an adult unless we were sick or something. It's not only the fact that he is sleeping in her bed in his underwear while she is only in hers that bothers me. It's the shame he obviously felt in telling me. Like, either it feels wrong to him as well or he was told not to tell me? I don't know. When he visits my husband's parents he sleeps on the couch in their family room, as he has done his whole life basically since he was out of a crib. He never has any issues there. I asked him about it again the other day, when he came back from a visit, and he immediately broke down sobbing and saying Grandma's couch is dirty. I can't sleep on it. Don't make me stop seeing Grandma, as if he is being told by her not to tell us where he sleeps. I told my husband I think he, as the father, should tell her he needs to be sleeping with clothes on at the very least, but says even if we tell her he needs to sleep clothed on the couch, she won't listen. He basically says she's weird but she's harmless. And even if we threaten to stop allowing him visits, does that even matter? We have no way of knowing what she is doing or not doing over there. She could promise to stop but continue it and we really won't know. Thoughts? Edit. I just think it's important to say that the PJs he is sent with are a t-shirt and shorts or fleece pants depending on season. Same thing he wears to bed at home. It's not like I'm expecting him to sleep in a nun's habit. Also, to those who pointed out Grandma's couch might really be very dirty, I never considered that honestly. To me, a dirty couch might have a few items on it that can be easily cleared off and put away. Grandma does have H.O.A. rotting issues and isn't a very hygienic person herself, so it is very possible the couch is quite dirtier than I ever imagined. Edit. One more thing. With regards to the H.O.A. rotting. Grandma has been a H.O.A. roter as long as my husband has known her, and I think that's why he kinda writes it off. Many of you are, rightly, appalled that we let him visit a known H.O.A. reader, but my husband doesn't see the actual danger of the H.O.A. rating situation, as it has never caused danger in her case before. She doesn't keep house as well as we do. That's a fact, but it's not the level of stuff you see on TV with bugs and mice and 40 million cats and rotten food, but it's definitely extremely cluttered and she won't throw anything away. She does throw food away, or at least always has in the past. He feels like since he has known her many years and even had her living with him at one point, he knows the general state of her home and doesn't consider it dangerous. I think the potential for danger is totally there, but I don't know how to get him to see that it's really not normal. You guys very well could be exactly right that it's more of a I don't want my parents to know how Grandma's house is or they won't let me go there reaction. I never considered that as an option. I thought the problem was the underwear thing, which while still unusual to me, the bed sharing as a result of uncleanliness H.O.A. rotting is the bigger problem. Thank you. Update. So, after all your comments, I pushed my husband to have us drive his son to the grandmother's house next time she asked to have him for the weekend, which was this past weekend. He didn't immediately agree to it, but eventually caved. Here's what happened. Turns out, Grandma lives in a fairly new townhouse community. Typical beige walls, beige carpet, laminate cabinets type deal. You all know the kind, I'm sure. When we got there, I said I really needed to use the bathroom. She at first was trying to tell me that there is a big 24/7 gas station a mile further down the road. Told you she hates me, but I told her it was pretty emergent and I would be quick. My husband just followed me in with my stepson, and you could tell Grandma was nervous. Ladies and gents, I was actually not as horrified as I thought I'd be. The townhouse was most certainly cluttered, but I would not call it a fire hazard. I would call it very tastelessly decorated. Knick-knack shelves on every wall, lots of magazines and flyers on tables, ugly-ass artificial swags above every door. The kind of place that would never look clean even if it were. Just a lot of ugly crap. But nothing dirty. The bathroom was messier than I would live with, but didn't seem gross. Lots of bottles and stuff laying out, that kind of thing. Toilet seemed normal and I peeked in the tub and it had a lot of bottles but wasn't dirty. Baseboards and study could have used a cleaning, but I can't say mine are spotless all the time, so, IDT. I thought it was a 1-bed/1 bath, but turns out it is a 2-bed 1 bath. One bedroom being Grandma's bedroom, the other being a sewing room/storage room. I looked in and there is certainly not room for a bed in it. Lots of boxes and totes and a big table with a sewing machine. I figured out the couch thing, I think. The couch is very obviously her dog's bed. Her dog is this big, white, reasonably friendly creature, but it was clear the couch is its spot. There was a fleece blanket covering most of the couch and said blanket was covered in dog hair. I would not want to sit on that, nor sleep there. So, as far as the underwear stuff, I made a point to tell Grandma that his PJs are in the bag and he needs to be wearing them, that he mentioned he doesn't wear them and we prefer he did. She was taken a little aback and kinda stumbled out an "oh, okay." My husband then added that since he is sleeping with her, she needs to be clothed too. as he also told us she slept in her underwear. She vehemently denied that, saying she sleeps in a granny gown. So, it would appear that the couch is indeed not a suitable sleeping spot. My husband told Grandma that next time we will be bringing a twin-size air mattress for her to keep there for him. I personally wish he, my husband, had done that this time, but I am picking my battles with him, but I'm going to make damn sure he does. When my stepson returned home, his PJs appeared worn. He claimed he wore them, and I said okay, but you won't be in trouble if you didn't, you just need to tell me, and he insisted he wore them. So, the visits aren't going to stop. My husband just does not think that is necessary. We will be providing Grandma with an air mattress to keep there for my stepson, and we will be monitoring the PJ situation. Thank you all for your comments on the original post. I'm doing the best I can to make this situation better. Edit. Please read the original post before commenting. Grandma is not my mill. She is not my husband's mother. She is my husband's first wife's mother. Edit 2. Please read the original post. Those PMing me telling me I'm sick for falsely accusing someone of molestation. I hardly call an anonymous what do you think of this situation post on a subreddit an accusation of molestation. Calm down. What if it had been molestation? Would I have been out of line then? No. Then it would be that poor boy. Why didn't you step in sooner? Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow at Story Slices.